emotional. I started to think about maybe the possibility of winning here today for my friend Sevi, and this one is for him. Okay.
He's a two-time Masters champion, a World Golf Hall of Famer, the captain who orchestrated the miracle at Medinah. But José María Olazábal is also the man nobody wanted to cross. 4 players learned this the hard way, and what happened between them reveals a side of golf's gentleman warrior that most fans never see. The thing about Olazábal is that he wasn't born difficult. He was forged that way. Growing up in Spain's Basque country, he built his game on precision and discipline. By the time he reached professional golf, he carried himself with an intensity that bordered on obsession. This wasn't just about winning. This was about honor, about the code. And when you live by a code that rigid, collisions are inevitable. His confrontations weren't random explosions of temper. They followed a pattern. Each one traced back to the same core belief, the same unbending standard of how the game should be played and how men should conduct themselves. Some called it integrity. Others called it stubborn pride. Either way, it made him impossible to intimidate and equally impossible to reason with once he felt wrong. The first explosion came at Kiowa Island in 1991. The Ryder Cup that year earned its nickname, the War by the Shore, and for good reason. This wasn't just golf. The event happened right after Desert Storm, and American patriotism had crossed from enthusiasm into something uglier. European players felt it immediately. The American captain, Dave Stockton, showed both teams a highlight reel of nothing but U.S. victories at the pre-tournament dinner. Then he introduced his own players by listing how much prize money each had won. The Europeans sat there furious. Olazábal walked into this atmosphere paired with his idol, Seve Ballesteros. Their opponents were Paul Azinger and Chip Beck. Azinger and Seve already had history from a rules dispute 2 years earlier, so everyone knew this match would be combustible. What nobody expected was how completely Olazábal had transformed. 4 years earlier, he'd been a silent rookie. Now he was world number 2, and he was ready to fight. The incident happened on the 7th tee. Ballesteros noticed something. Azinger and Beck had changed the type of ball they were using mid-round. Under the rules, that's illegal. It could have cost them multiple holes. But here's where it gets interesting. The Spanish pair didn't say anything immediately. They waited. They sat on this information for several holes, letting it simmer, and then brought it up at the turn when the European captain could alert officials. This delay was calculated. Ballesteros and Olazábal were playing psychological warfare, timing their accusation for maximum impact. Because they waited, the Americans escaped any penalty, but Azinger and Beck admitted they'd switched balls. They just claimed it was unintentional. That's when Azinger tried to defend himself. "We made a mistake," he said, "but we certainly weren't cheating." Ballesteros hit back instantly. "It has nothing to do with cheating. Cheating and breaking the rules are two different things." Think about that distinction for a moment. Azinger appealed to intent, the idea that an honest mistake shouldn't be punished like deliberate deception. But to Ballesteros and Olazábal, intent meant nothing. The rule was broken. End of discussion. This cut to the heart of who Olazábal was becoming. He was adopting a worldview where the rulebook was sacred, where violations demanded consequences regardless of circumstances. It was rigid and unforgiving, and while it made him fierce, it also made him someone who couldn't bend, couldn't see gray areas even when they existed. The furious row that followed was strategic. The Spanish pair had been 3 down at the turn. They weaponized this rules violation, manufactured outrage from it, and used it to fuel their comeback. They won the match 2-1. Olazábal had learned a crucial lesson that day. In team golf, the rulebook isn't just a guide. It's a weapon. The student had graduated. He was no longer the passive rookie from 1987. He was now an active combatant, willing to blur the line between justified outrage and theatrical manipulation if it meant winning for his team. If you're seeing how Olazábal's code started to form, drop a comment about which rivalry shocked you most. These stories only get more intense from here. 12 years later, Olazábal faced a rules dispute where he was on the receiving end, and his reaction revealed just how deeply his sense of honor ran, how volatile he could become when he felt personally accused. It was the 2003 Seve Trophy. Olazábal faced Padraig Harrington in a crucial singles match on the final day. On the 3rd green, Harrington noticed 2 small marks on Olazábal's putting line. Here's where everything went wrong. Golf rules say you can repair pitch marks, the indentations made by a ball landing on the green, but you cannot repair spike marks, the marks left by shoes. The problem was Harrington himself wasn't sure which type these were. As Harrington looked around for a referee to make a ruling, Olazábal went ahead and fixed the marks anyway. When Harrington mentioned it, Olazábal's response was immediate and absolute. He felt his integrity was being questioned. He felt accused of cheating, so he snatched up his ball, conceded the hole, and marched to the next tee without another word. The remaining 15 holes were played in icy silence. Harrington later called them 15 very awkward holes. Imagine the tension. 2 professionals walking the same fairways, reading the same greens, maintaining absolute silence because one felt mortally offended, and the other couldn't understand why a simple procedural question had triggered such an extreme reaction. After the match, which Harrington halved to retain the trophy for his team, the two were locked in private conversation for 15 minutes. Olazábal stood there, square-jawed, moody, refusing every effort at reconciliation. Even Seve Ballesteros and Colin Montgomery, the team captains, tried to smooth things over. Olazábal wouldn't budge. He stood his ground with the same stubbornness that had defined his entire career, the same refusal to compromise that made him both brilliant and impossible. His manager later explained it perfectly. That was the only time in Olazábal's career anyone had accused him of cheating. His entire identity was built on an unimpeachable foundation of honor. Think back to 1991 when he and Seve took the hard line on rules violations. Intent didn't matter then. The rule was the rule. But now, when someone questioned his actions, even procedurally, even uncertainly, he took it as a moral accusation. Here's the cruel irony. In 1991, Olazábal had no problem calling out Azinger for a rules violation, dismissing any consideration of intent or accident. The letter of the law was absolute, but when Harrington simply asked for clarification about marks on a green, something any player might do in the spirit of ensuring fair play, Olazábal interpreted it as a character assassination. The same man who showed no mercy in enforcing rules against others demanded total trust and deference when his own actions were questioned. The same burning intensity that once made him punch a wall after a bad round now made him concede a hole in protest. His honor was his third rail. Touch it, and everything exploded. But what made this incident particularly revealing was its disproportionate nature. Harrington hadn't accused him. Harrington had asked a question, sought a ruling, tried to follow proper procedure. In any reasonable interpretation, this was golf as it should be played, with both competitors ensuring the rules were followed correctly. But Olazábal couldn't see it that way. His reaction was pure emotion, raw and unfiltered. It showed a fragility beneath all that intensity, a vulnerability that contradicted his image as the hardened competitor. He could dish it out as he proved with Azinger. He couldn't take it as he proved with Harrington. That double standard would haunt him for years. 9 years later, the grudge resurfaced. Olazábal was named captain of the 2012 Ryder Cup team. Harrington's name came up as a potential wildcard pick. The media immediately pounced on the old rift, and Olazábal was forced to respond. He called the suggestions totally untrue, a lot of nonsense, and insisted that anyone who thought the 2003 incident interfered with his judgment was completely wrong. But then, in the same breath, he was brutally honest about Harrington's form. Harrington needs to do extraordinarily well, he said. He's well back on the list. He needs at least a victory. The bluntness was striking. The vehemence of his denial combined with the harshness of his public assessment suggested the topic was still raw. Harrington's poor form gave Olazábal perfect professional cover for leaving him off the team, but the decision was almost certainly influenced by that lingering rift, even subconsciously. Olazábal later admitted the phone call to Harrington was the hardest he had to make. That comment reveals everything. It was the cognitive dissonance of a captain making a professionally sound decision that also conveniently settled a 9-year-old personal score. The hardness of the call wasn't about form or strategy. It was about unresolved tension that never fully healed. The relationship with Colin Montgomery was different. There was no specific feud, but there was conflict, and it came from Olazábal's stubborn, singular refusal to play the game by anyone's rules but his own. In his amateur days, Olazábal established clear dominance over Montgomery. He beat the Scot in the final of the 1984 British Amateur Championship. He beat him again in a singles match during the 1985 European Amateur Team Championship, even making a hole in one during that match. While Montgomery graciously recalls this as the start of a friendship, the record shows a hierarchy. Olazábal was the unprecedented winner of the British Boys, Youths, and Amateur Championships. He was the dominant player, and Montgomery knew it. Fast forward to 2009. Colin Montgomery had just been named captain of the 2010 Ryder Cup team, and he publicly announced that Olazábal had agreed to be his vice-captain. There was just one problem. Olazábal hadn't agreed. The next day, a startled Olazábal said, "No, I haven't." But Montgomery didn't let it go. Months later, he claimed again on television that Olazábal had accepted. In an almost comical scene, Olazábal, standing right next to Montgomery at an event in Seville, publicly denied it again. "I've not said that," he stated. "It was news to me." Then came his now famous passive-aggressive explanation for the confusion. "Maybe my English is not good." Everyone knew his English was fine. The real issue was a conflict of priorities. Olazábal was focused on recovering from recurring rheumatic pains and making every effort to make the team as a player. Montgomery was focused on building his captaincy narrative for the media. Olazábal refused to be a ceremonial prop in someone else's press strategy. A more diplomatic player would have handled this privately, perhaps with a quiet word to avoid public embarrassment. But Olazábal issued 2 public, humiliating denials. This wasn't about animosity. It was about fierce protection of his own agency. He wouldn't play the game, wouldn't smooth things over for appearances, even at the cost of embarrassing a fellow professional. His stubbornness, his refusal to compromise, was the same trait that made him great and the same trait that made him difficult. To understand why Olazábal became so confrontational, you have to go back to where it started. The 1986 1997 Ryder Cup, his debut. He was 21 years old, a boy paired with his idol Seve Ballesteros. On the first hole of their match against Curtis Strange and Tom Kite, Olazábal putted to 3 feet, but his stance was on Strange's through line, the potential path of Strange's putt past the hole. Ballesteros wanted his young partner to put out. Strange objected, citing a rule clarified in a meeting the night before. Olazábal's role here was entirely passive. He stood silent while the two veterans argued. The conflict was between Ballesteros and Strange. Seve came charging up and challenged Strange directly. "That bother you?" Strange said yes, it did. So Ballesteros, a master of gamesmanship, stomped over to his chip and chipped it right into the back of the hole. Then he walked off the green pumping his fist at Strange. Olazábal watched all of this. He had a front row seat to see his partner turn a legitimate rules objection into a moment of psychological dominance and humiliation. That chip-in was the ultimate power move, and the lesson was clear. In the Ryder Cup, rules aren't just a code, they're a weapon. 4 years later, Olazábal was no longer the silent boy. He was the hardened soldier using that same weapon against Azinger. Every one of these confrontations traces back to a code. Not a written one, but something deeper, something Olazábal carried inside him that governed every decision, every reaction, every boundary he refused to let anyone cross. The code had 3 main triggers. First, any violation of team or partner loyalty. That was the Seve doctrine, learned in 1987 and perfected in 1991. It explained the furious row with Azinger. When someone broke the rules against his team, intent didn't matter. The rule was broken, and he would fight. Second, any violation of personal integrity. That was the Harrington trigger, the most potent and emotional of all. A perceived attack on his honor, an accusation of cheating, was a capital offense in Olazábal's world. It short-circuited every other consideration and led to absolute, emotional, even self-destructive reactions, like conceding that hole in protest. Third, any violation of personal priority. That was the Montgomery principle. He refused to have his career and health subordinated to someone else's media strategy, and he made that refusal public, even if it meant embarrassing a colleague. These weren't random feuds. They were the predictable result of a rigid personality operating in a high-pressure environment. The same uncompromising spirit that fueled his comeback from rheumatoid polyarthritis, an illness so severe he was sometimes reduced to crawling, was the trait that made these conflicts inevitable. When his code was violated, he reacted. Every time, without exception. Olazábal guards the game's traditions ferociously. In 1997, he returned a large sponsor's check because he felt he hadn't earned it. That's who he is. His confrontations weren't about hatred. They were about that ferocious, deeply held integrity clashing with reality. His greatest strength, his character, became the trigger for his most significant conflicts. A more conventional, media-savvy player would have handled the Montgomery dispute with a quiet word. A less intense player would have let a referee sort out the Harrington situation without personalizing it. But Olazábal couldn't do either. His burning intensity, his singular nature, wouldn't allow it. His career is a story of fighting his body during his illness, fighting the golf course, and in these 4 instances, fighting his opponents with the same fire. The negative incidents aren't a contradiction of his character as a golf virtuoso and revered traditionalist. They're the same traits: his uncompromising passion, his ferocious defense of honor, his singular intensity, just viewed from a more confrontational angle. He's both admired and resented for the same reasons, loved and hated for the same qualities. The man who orchestrated the miracle at Medinah was also the man who refused to forgive Harrington, who publicly embarrassed Montgomery, who turned a rules dispute with Azinger into psychological warfare. These aren't separate people. This is José María Olazábal, complete and unfiltered. In the end, his confrontations reveal something uncomfortable about excellence. The traits that make someone great, truly great, often make them difficult, stubborn, uncompromising, rigid to the point of self-destruction. Olazábal's code made him a champion. It also made him enemies, and he wouldn't have changed a thing because changing the code would have meant changing who he was. For better and worse, he lived by it completely. Which of these rivalries do you think revealed the most about Olazábal's character? Was he right to stand his ground, or did his pride cost him relationships that mattered? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the hidden tensions and forgotten feuds that shaped golf history, subscribe. These stories deserve to be told.